From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. First, a programming note. The PBS News special report, War in the Holy Land, will air at 8:30 p.m., immediately after Capitol Journal. Also, let me apologize to our viewers who weren't able to watch last week's Capitol Journal. We had a technical issue that caused broadcast interruptions, a rare occurrence that shouldn't happen again. But just as a reminder, you can find our shows online at aptv.org or on our new YouTube channel. Just search Capitol Journal in YouTube to find our episodes online there. On to the news. The state of Alabama may be one step closer to making medical marijuana products available to patients. This week, the Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission met to discuss revamping the application and selection process for which companies would receive licenses to grow, transport, and sell medical marijuana. The process has been delayed multiple times due to setbacks stemming from discrepancies in the scoring system in the original application process. That led to a flurry of lawsuits from companies claiming the process wasn't fair. On Thursday, the Commission voted to adopt new rules. It says ensures fairness and transparency for all applicants.
October 26th, the next Commission meeting, we will have a lot on our plate to approve or disapprove. So a lot of motions to take place, which will set the agenda moving swiftly through November and December.
Are you aiming to have those licenses awarded by the end of the year? That sounded like that was
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
How confident are you given the bumpy rollout of this process?
I'm pretty confident. It all depends on what the courts allow us to do. But we do think we're making headway. So it is dependent on what the court accommodates us to do. But we're hoping that by the end of the year, we can award licenses before the end of the year.
It gives us opportunity to truly focus on the services that we want to provide without having that, here's another financial thing that we have to worry about, and in addition to the licensing fees, in addition to the application fees. We shouldn't have had to pay to be heard, simply just to be able to give an explanation or to be able to ask questions. I feel like now with the transparency that they're going to allow us to get and the transparency that they're opening themselves up, that we can move forward and we can truly get everything in place for the patients, the legislators, and the legislatures and the community that may have additional questions and want to know who we are, who's here in Alabama, who has our interests, who has our best interests at hand.
The law legalizing medical marijuana was passed back in 2021, and many expected products to be available by now. The delays are frustrating for patients who say they need the drug to help cope with painful and debilitating diseases. One such patient was at the Commission's meeting on Thursday.
It is vital for patients like myself who are suffering, and it's not just that we're suffering, it's that we are dying. And there is tons, 50 years worth of research been done in Israel, and yet we're here and we're battling over things that we should not be battling. When it's already been scientifically proven, I have stood up, I have proven it, and I'm suffering greatly. My health is suffering greatly because I'm having to do without medical cannabis.
Some debate this week on how to prioritize road and bridge construction. Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth expressed criticism of how the Department of Transportation is prioritizing the West Alabama Corridor project, while other needs like Interstate 65 still need attention, he says. His comments to me were on the In the Weeds podcast, and they were candid, to say the least.
We don't need to hamstring ourselves from just putting all our money, state resources into a project in Southwest Alabama. If we could spend maybe $200 or $300 million of state dollars and draw down the rest federal dollars in that project, instead of getting done in 5 or 6 years, maybe it takes 10 to 15, but the feds are picking up a big part of that. That makes a lot more sense from a fiscal standpoint than the state paying 100% of that.
The Department of Transportation has told the legislature that federal money was not available for the West Alabama Corridor project, and also pointed to several Rebuild Alabama projects around the state that are ongoing or planned. That includes the widening of Interstate 65 along a 10-mile stretch in fast-growing Shelby County. Former State Senator Roger Bedford passed away this week. The longtime lawmaker was 67 years old. Bedford was a giant in Alabama politics, serving in the state Senate for 28 years. His mastery of the rules made Bedford especially dominant on the Senate floor, often to the frustration of the opposition. Clay Redden covered and observed Bedford through his whole career in the State House.
When he first came here in the early 1980s, there was something about him that told you he was going to move up in the state Senate and maybe politics in general in Alabama. That's just the type of guy he was. When most freshmen came to Montgomery, then and now to some degree, they were told by the veterans, and most of those were long-term members of the House or Senate, but in the Senate especially, their recommendation for freshmen were to sit down, watch, learn, and keep quiet. Well, that wasn't Roger's style, not by any stretch of the imagination. Roger was very passionate about the issues he championed. The ones that come to mind have to do with children, children's health and children first. That passion could sometimes cross over into abrasiveness on the Senate floor when he was at the microphone. But there was never any question about where Roger stood on issues or where you stood with Roger. I believe he was 25 years old when he was elected to the Senate. And that was obviously unheard of. Most of the time, people were in their 30s, late 30s. And at that time, I would say the average age of a state senator was easily early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. So Roger pretty much hit the ground running when he got to Montgomery. He just didn't sit back and watch. He learned and he acted.
Bedford will be missed by a great many, and our thoughts are with his family. Alabama watched with the rest of the world the atrocities that took place in Israel last weekend as Hamas terrorists attacked multiple Israeli areas, killing, maiming, and kidnapping men, women, and children. The brutality hit home in a chilling way for Alabama's Jewish community. We caught up with State Representative Philip Ensler of Montgomery, the only Jewish member of the Alabama legislature.
To wake up on Saturday morning on the Sabbath to the news of women, children, Holocaust survivors, the elderly being massacred, being raped, being beheaded in Israel was just horrific, to say the least. It can't even be fully captured in words. So this has been a very difficult time for the Jewish community in Alabama, but also just for anybody that has a big heart, anybody that of conscience, just to see that kind of human suffering, without even getting into the politics of it, or Democrat or Republican, or at times what side of the issue people are on. I mean, just for humanity, this has been a really trying time. So both as a legislator, but also in my role in the nonprofit community, this has just been a very difficult time for a lot of people. Whether it's threats, within America from white supremacists, and there is a rise, I should say, in anti-Semitism, attacks on Jewish people from white supremacists in America, but then, also now these atrocities carried out by Hamas, by a terrorist group in Israel, in the Middle East. And for anyone, though, of any background that feels threatened or has been threatened or attacked because of who they are, that's wrong. Everyone in America, everyone in the world, as maybe idealistic as it sounds, I mean, everybody should be able to live safely, peacefully, be able to not live in fear because of who they are, because of their background or identity.
Turning to Washington, the House of Representatives is still without a speaker after the removal of Kevin McCarthy last week. House Republicans, who hold a slim majority, first nominated Steve Scalise of Louisiana as a replacement, but he couldn't win enough members of the hard right. Now, Jim Jordan of Ohio is nominated, with a vote scheduled for Monday. But it's unlikely he'll get support from all traditional conservatives. Alabama Congressman Mike Rogers had harsh words for the 8 Republicans who created this chaotic situation by removing McCarthy, calling them traitors. He went on to say, quote, "The bottom line is we have a very fractured conference, and to limit ourselves to just getting 217 out of our conference, I think, is not a wise path." By 217, Rogers is referring to how many votes it takes to win a majority in the House right now to elect a speaker. He has said that because a handful of Republicans won't agree on anybody, it may take working with Democrats to elect a speaker so that the House can function properly. Last week's broadcast interruptions caused many to miss Randy Scott's story on electric vehicle growth in Alabama's rural areas. Here's his report.
Tuskegee, fortunately, has been involved in a lot of history, and we like to be out front on anything that's developing. And technology and research, something like this is something that we feel like we want to be out front on.
Tuskegee Mayor Tony Haygood is very optimistic about new changes coming to his city.
It's a smaller community, but we have some great things happening now. We have our first major industry coming in, Samkey, which is a South Korean industry. We just came back from South Korea a week before last and met with them. So we're looking forward to the development of this die-cast aluminum company, which will supply Hyundai and Kia and eventually the Ford F-150.
Progress like this is opening doors and giving this East Alabama area exposure, says Haygood.
First major industry we've had, industrial type industry. We had the VA hospital for a number of years when we had the university, but it's the first industry within the city limits. The Moton Field, where you had the Tuskegee Airmen and what they contributed to the U.S. military, to World War II, and the outstanding job that they did, which many people are still astonished today about the accomplishments they made, especially when you consider the barriers they face.
Tuskegee, Alabama has deep roots in the state's history. Now leaders want to make sure they have a firm foothold in the future too. So that's why they're taking steps to get ready for it.
One of those changes is getting ready for the increased number of electric vehicles coming here. The infrastructure will see some new tools, such as charging stations, says Mayor Haygood. He hopes financial aid will come from the state and federal government to help Tuskegee.
In our planning as a city had been talking about it 4 or 5 years or more. And what we want to do is put down some charging stations downtown, so when people come downtown, they can charge their cars if they want. We want to work with the campus to put them on the campus because it's a National Historic Site. You have Booker T. Washington's home, you have the George Washington Carver Museum on the campus. People come, spend time, so they can charge their cars while they're there.
Also, helping educate citizens about electric vehicles.
We had a demonstration on the campus about 3 or 4 years ago, right before COVID, and they brought examples of electric cars there, the Tesla and some others that were out then. I think Chevrolet had a car out then and 2 or 3 other companies. And they brought them on the campus for the students to see, especially engineering students.
Haygood says Tuskegee University is already seeing electric vehicles on its campus and around town.
We have several professors and administrators on the campus that have them. They're very, very quiet. You notice when they pass by, you have to look around because you don't hear them coming. You hear the sound of the breeze, but you don't hear the sound of the motor. They're very quiet, they're very fast, as I said, and very nice in design.
Those infrastructure update plans extend from downtown Tuskegee to I-85.
Then at exit 38, where there'll be opening travel center soon, we've already put in where there will be 3 or 4 charging stations there. So we welcome this new age of electric cars in our community.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Joining me next is John Hamm, Commissioner of the Alabama Department of Corrections. Commissioner, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate you inviting me.
There's lots to talk about, but let's start with prison construction. That's kind of been the big topic in the news here lately. Alabama is investing a tremendous amount of resources in rebuilding its prison infrastructure. I know the Elmore County facility is up and going. Escambia, maybe some site prep work. Can you update us on where we are on those facilities, especially Elmore, and when can we, in the context of when can we start to see, results from those tremendous investments?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and we try of, educating people as much as we can when we come in contact with them about what's going on with the construction project. And Elmore is progressing nicely. It has been going on for several months. As far as seeing what you can, it's a lot of underground works, sewer systems, the stormwater, that type stuff. So you don't really see a whole lot, but we've done our footings, some slabs. So probably in about 2 or 3 weeks, you're actually going to see things coming out of the ground as far as setting the sails. The sails are concrete sails that are actually built on site, and they will probably start setting those in place for one of the housing units in a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that probably most people don't know. They hear a 4,000 bed facility. They think it's just one building with 4,000 cells in it. This site's going to have probably 50 buildings in it, and it's going to range from anywhere from minimum work release to maximum security inmates. So we're going to have different housing units on the complex to accommodate those inmates. Plus, the Elmore facility is called the Elmore Specialized Men's Facility, specialized because of the medical component and the mental health component that we'll have at that facility.
And that's part of the point, right, is making a safer prison, meeting those mental health needs. That's two of the things that we've been under fire for, and the state's been under fire for. And I wanted to get to that too because I know staffing has been a real problem, right? We're understaffed in the prison system. So, I know that that's part of the point too. Building these new facilities will maybe help that situation. But where are we now in terms of trying to meet the court's order of increasing that staff both on the correctional officer side and the mental health side?
Well, that's something from day one that we started working on because we know that was an issue with security staffing. The mental health staffing is an issue, but we have made strides in that. Our mental health provider does a good job with that. But our security staff, our correctional officers, that's what we really concentrated on since day one. And it was pretty bleak, when we came in. We had an academy class when I came in that had 7 correctional officers in it. We just graduated one that had 60. We started one this past Monday, and we had 67, I believe, in that one. So we've actually are in the black now as far as not losing more correctional officers than we're gaining since May. So it's a small gain, but it is a gain in the black. So we work hard every day on the recruiting and retention of correctional officers.
Well, it's a dangerous job, right?
Absolutely.
And that obviously makes it tough to recruit. I know y'all have raised salaries. I mean, the last ones I saw were increased dramatically. Is that having an impact? I mean, it's a pretty lucrative job at this point.
Absolutely, that has helped. That's been the single factor that has really given us a shot in the arm on our hiring. At first we were doing these small things trying to boost it, but the pay raise, that has really been significant in the number of applicants that we have and are working through to fill our academy classes. So yes, with the high school education, 19 years old, you can start at Department of Corrections, $52,000. And probably in 18 months, you'll be making 72. So it's a pretty good living.
Will having new facilities make it easier? Because it's not just, obviously it's a dangerous job, but these old facilities make them even more dangerous, right? Just because they're dilapidated, don't have some of the updated security features?
Yeah, the facilities we have are old, and maintenance has always been an issue with our facilities. So having the new facilities, certainly modern designs where it's a lot safer. We'll have technology in there to assist the officers in the security aspect. So it should be also advantage to us on recruiting correctional officers.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the prison construction issue, there's been quite the sticker shock, especially among lawmakers who started this project out with a lot less financial commitment than what it is now. And I know the scope has changed, and we've had inflation and things like that. But how do you, when you talk to them, to lawmakers, how do you justify these increased costs? And will it be worth it?
Yeah, of course, I was at another state agency when a lot of this was transpiring, and the $600 and something million initial cost, that was based on, I think it was 2019 pricing with about a 4% inflation factor. So we come in, and there's several things that happened. Inflation is certainly risen, but it's not all inflation. A lot of it we're finding is the construction market, because with all the government money and everybody building, it's created difficulty in getting bids, contractors wanting to bid on certain projects and stuff. And this is an enormous project. It's probably one of the largest in the state. So when you sign up, you're signing up for about 3 years. So the construction market has dictated a lot of the cost as well. Colleagues in Utah, they started in 2016 with $550 million for a 3,600 bed facility, and it was just a little over $1 billion. Indiana, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, just signed to build a, I think 3,500 bed facility at $1.2 billion. And of course, it's some sticker shock, but it's kind of what the trend is around the country. Also, when we got in and started looking at the plans, we had to go back and basically reconcile those plans with some of the court orders that we have in the Braggs and Department of Justice lawsuits. And there was several changes that needed to be made that drove the cost up. Also, we're looking at it, this is a lot of taxpayer dollars, and we're going to use them as judiciously as possible. So when we see things that are not life cycle, positive, we wanted to change it so that the people of the state, they're not going to be saying, why y'all got to replace something after 3 years? We want to make sure this is a 30, 50-year building where some of these components don't have to be changed out until then. And some of it was some of the central plant issues we had, and a couple other things, but we wanted to make sure that, it was going to be a facility that we knew would last.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears to another issue I know you all face, and that's contraband. I heard you describe this to the Prison Oversight Committee as one of the biggest problems that you face.
Yes, sir.
You even talked about people using a potato gun to shoot drugs over the fence, which I'd never even heard of that. Talk about the issue of contraband, because it really contributes to every other problem you have, right? Are there things that other states have done, maybe the feds have done, to crack down on contraband that maybe we can learn from to help stem the problem here in Alabama?
Yeah, and it's, keep saying our number one issue is staffing. We want to get our staffing up, because then that solves a lot of other issues, and contraband's one of them. But contraband is our number 2 issue with the Department of Corrections. And it is such an issue around the country that the professional association I belong to, the Correctional Leaders Association, we have a monthly call on contraband where we're all sitting around talking about the contraband issues we have, what each other's trying, what kind of best practices, how we can mitigate contraband coming into the facilities. Because contraband in the facilities, it kind of dictates all the other behavior that goes on in the facility. So we have a couple of things that we're doing that hopefully will, in the next several months, mitigate some of the contraband coming in, but also The main thing is when we get our staffing, when we get these correctional officers out of the academy and they go to the facility, I mean, more correctional officers will certainly cut down on that. But yeah, they're very creative in how they get contraband into the facilities. Like I said, with potato guns, they shoot it over. They use drones. They use staff. You think of it, and they try getting it in.
Yeah, well, you mentioned staff because that's I guess that was brought up by the members of the committee. They were saying, I mean, obviously, if it's that widespread, there are going to be bad apples amongst the corrections. So you've almost got to have like a police force to police your own staff to make sure they're not part of the problem and weed out the bad apples.
That is correct, and you know we don't tolerate it. There's zero tolerance for that activity, and especially in my previous agency. You know, they should know I'm not going to tolerate that. So we do have about 50 agents within the Department of Corrections, our law enforcement branch, that they investigate all these claims, and you know we do arrest some of our own folks.
Let's talk about your reentry efforts. Obviously, when someone reaches their end of sentence, we want them to reenter society in a positive way so as to not return to prison, to not reoffend. I know y'all have been working at Ingram State for decades. You got the new Perry County facility. Talk about reentry efforts and what progress is being made there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You know, when someone gets sentenced to prison, you know, the main thing is punishment for whatever offense they committed against an individual or against the state. But then that second component is just what you said. They're going to get back into society. So, you know, I say a lot of times we're the only business where we do not want repeat customers. So when you leave the Department of Corrections, we don't want you to come back. So how do we help that process? Well, our reentry, we have multiple programs that the inmates can go through while they're incarcerated. But you mentioned Ingram, and we have a great relationship with Chancellor Jimmy Baker's over the two-year college system and Ingram State Technical College, where they provide job training. We have HVAC, we have electrical, we have plumbing, we have diesel mechanics, we have industrial maintenance, and a couple of other programs that are very sought after employment opportunities for, you know, people that know this skilled trade. And it's not a 2-week course or a 6-week course. I mean, this is full certification. They get their OSHA cards. So Ingram provides that instruction for these inmates. So when they do get released back into society, a lot of times they'll have jobs before they're released because these companies are needing these skilled workers. We also have an internship, apprenticeship with a 4-star Freightliner on diesel mechanics. So they're ready to hire the individuals when they get out because they have not only their certification, but they have practical experience as well. So all these things, you know, we're trying to make it to where they do not return. You know, you got a job, and if you have housing, if you have IDs, and if you have transportation, you know, you should be successful and not return to the Department of Corrections.
If you have opportunities, it gives you hope, and that helps you be successful. And it's interesting. I was talking with Cam Ward last week at Pardons and Paroles, and I wanted to ask you about that issue too, because I guess with a lot of reentry, you're talking about end of sentence, correct? But there's also the parole issue, and you know, here this year and here recently, our parole rate has gone way down. It almost ground to a halt over the summer because the board wasn't really functioning. But I was talking to Mr. Director Ward about this in the terms of, you know, if I'm an inmate and, you know, I know I was sentenced and there was a chance for parole, but I learned through the grapevine that, no, the state's not doing that anymore. I don't have a chance to get parole. Doesn't that make me more likely to lose that hope? Because I know to get that parole, I was going to have to be on my best behavior and not, you know, be part of the problem. And so doesn't that lack of hope from a parole system that, you know, didn't really operate for a while contribute to the violent nature of prisons by having folks lose that hope and lose that incentive to behave?
Well, that's a good point, because we have inmates that work in our building and headquarters, and I talk with them pretty regular, and that's one of the things they talk about is, you know, when they come into the Department of Corrections, they're pretty much given a checklist of, you know, do these things and you'll have a good chance of getting paroled. And a lot of them do those things and with the hope of getting paroled, and when that doesn't happen, they do start losing hope of getting out via parole. So, and there's some of the inmates saying, hey, there's some people in prison that don't need to get out, you know, but
Sure.
there's the ones that, you know, given that second chance, they've done their punishment, they've taken the opportunity of the services we provide for them to re-enter into society. So they're looking for that. And you know, sometimes when they get denied parole or don't come up for parole or get set off for 5 years, yeah, they lose hope. Then their behavior inside the facilities are going to start being behavior that we don't need.
Well, it's a good point, good observation, and I think the parole board is back up to at least operating because of the recent appointment. Look, we're out of time, but thanks so much, Commissioner, for coming on, and I hope you'll come back again soon.
Absolutely, Todd. I certainly appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next is Dr. Jack Hawkins, Chancellor of Troy University. Dr. Hawkins, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to be with you today, too.
Well, I've been looking forward to having you on, but it's a pretty big week because y'all are just coming after homecoming. And I saw a lot of, you know, Facebook and tweets and things like that. Sounds like y'all had a pretty big time for homecoming weekend.
Well, I ran into the Chamber of Commerce executive director on Saturday morning just before the parade, and I said, this is a classic Chamber of Commerce day. And, of course, she agreed. And it was a great day, great parade, great community support, thousands of alumni and students, and then we won the football game. So it was a great Saturday.
Big win, and now you get to go to West Point, right? That's
we
gotta
do.
be pretty
We
fun.
do. Yeah,
So,
we were inhospitable to them last year and prevailed 10-9. And so I hope when we go to West Point that we can repeat. But it's a great honor to play our service academies. We serve so many military men, women, veterans, you know, and so it's great for Patriotic University to be invited to go to West Point.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be watching that. I wanted to ask you some policy here. We've been reading about the Alabama Commission on Higher Education, AIC.
Right.
You're in the midst of a role change when it comes to this, and having to do with research institutions and really expanding that role, doctoral programs. Can you walk me through kind of what this means?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I really appreciate the leadership of Dr. Jim Purcell and the members of the Alabama Commission on Higher Ed. I think they do a great job. Their job is to regulate and to advocate, and I think they do well in both of those areas. The regulation piece is certainly important because it prevents unnecessary duplication in the state. And they do a yeoman's job of maintaining that balance so that the needs of the people of the state are met, but they're done so in a timely and economic manner. What it means for us in terms of the role change, you know, a university or a college typically begins teaching, and then the public service dimension is added, and we do a lot of both. We've done the teaching piece since 1887. The public service function includes many things, such as our online programs that help high school students, the Rosa Parks Museum, and so many other things. But the real maturation of an institution occurs when the institution is engaged in identifying new solutions to existing and old problems. That's research. And that's what I see the future of Troy University encompassing. But the step that was taken on September the 8th by the Alabama Commission on Higher Ed was certainly an affirmation or reaffirmation, I think, of the quality of what we've been able to achieve at Troy. And it simply means that we are now authorized as to be a doctoral degree institution. We offer 3 doctorates currently. We offered the first in nursing in 2007, and then we added a PhD in sport management in 2012, and then a few years later we added a PhD in global leadership, which is a classically successful program. To get beyond that program, though, of that number of doctorates, we had to be reclassified, and that's what occurred. And that was, we saw it as a great testimony to the maturation of the institution. That now allows us to be considered for the next step, and that is an R2, or a research university. And it's not about institutional ego. It's about service to students. It's about service to the community. You know, our main campus in Troy, located in Troy, Alabama, in southeast Alabama, is important to that, particularly to that region.
It's an economic engine.
Well, and you think about it too, it's an underserved part of Alabama, often forgotten, actually, but it hadn't been forgotten by us. And so we want to continue to serve that region. I think there are so many unanswered questions in business and in other areas that we can help address by virtue of that next step into that research. But we saw it as a great testimony to where we are, and a great, and I think it added value to every degree we've ever awarded, and it's added value to every degree that we ever will award. And earlier you asked, what does this mean to the person on the street? Perhaps it was, and I was asked that shortly after September the 8th, and my response was, well, if you frame it in football terms, what this means is we have just beaten LSU 3 times in a row. That's most people would understand that analogy versus this being a doctoral degree institution, but I think it was a major growth step for the university and for the state.
Oh, I remember that one. You know, yeah, something like that. You know, when I think of Troy, just over the years, I think a lot about your growth in your reach internationally. I know that there's a school in Vietnam now, and that's been around. Talk about what that's been like. I know that's been a big mission of yours to grow Troy International and where we are now.
Well, I've been blessed to serve Troy since 1989, and when I arrived in Troy, I found an interesting scenario. We had only 40 international students on campus, yet we were serving the military in 10 countries, 26 military bases throughout Europe. And never the two came together. And so we set out to really globalize the institution, and not just not for no good reason. It was for a very sound reason, and that is our desire is to graduate globally competitive students. And you can't graduate globally competitive students if they're not globally aware. And so our goal, number one, was to bring the world to Troy. Before COVID, we had 75 countries represented on our on our campus, with 425 from China alone. And so a big part of what we have become, and it's been labeled by the media as Alabama's International University, but our second thrust was to continue to plant the flag in faraway places. And when the Berlin Wall came down in the early 90s and the Soviet Union fell apart, then our troop strength in Europe was downsized by 2/3. We relooked and saw the future not in Europe but in Asia, and so it was then that we began to plant our flag in Asia. And today we are located in several countries. We're on military bases in Japan and Korea. We have programs in China, in Malaysia, and I'm really proud of our programs in Vietnam. When I left Vietnam in 1969, I never intended to return, but I did in 2002, and we set up, or in 2001, we set up programs in 2002, became the first American university to ever award the bachelor's degree in Vietnam, and that occurred in 2008. Today, we have over 1,000 students on the ground in Vietnam. We have over 1,500 alumni, and we leave in just a few days to return to Vietnam to hold several commencement ceremonies throughout the country. It's a vibrant country, and you know, we think about the growing relationship between Vietnam and America, and they may be labeled communist, but we've never had one student, and we've had hundreds of them, who wanted to study communism or socialism. They want to know about the free market system. and what made our country great. And I think we're building great ambassadors one at a time, and it certainly has served our students. But the third dimension on internationalization is study abroad. And when you look around and see all these thousands of Troy car tags, well, our supporters and alumni and students will pay $50. The state sends us back about $48. We've saved that money. We've invested it. Today we have a fund of about $11 million, and we use only the proceeds to support our students in study abroad. Every student who enrolls at Troy, be they on campus or online, is eligible for a $1,250 per year scholarship to go abroad, and that helps defray the expense for many students who otherwise would never have that opportunity. And so I think between these three dimensions, what we've seen is the realization of what we wanted to achieve, and that is graduating students who are globally competitive.
While I've got you, I wanted to ask about this issue of retaining our college graduates here in Alabama. It's been an issue for many universities, and we know that it's never going to be 100% of our students that go to college here are going to stay and work and live here. But it's maybe a higher percentage leaving over the years to other states than we'd like. Y'all have had some success at this, so I'm curious, what's that secret sauce? How have y'all been successful at retaining many of your graduates to work right here in Alabama?
Well, we've really focused on practitioner-oriented programs and programs that lead to careers. And the majority of our students, certainly not all, we get students from all over the world. We typically will have all 50 states represented. But if you look at the majority of our students, they come from Alabama. And the majority of that will come from South Alabama. And our largest draw is within 100 miles. And when you look at the 18 counties in South Alabama, the number one institution in terms of their choice of enrollment is Troy. And so we start with people who understand the state, they understand their communities, they love their communities, and if we train them in areas where there are jobs, and that's what we try to do, then many of those students, in fact the majority of them, migrate back into those communities to carve out a life and a career and to grow their families. And so it has worked well. While we recruit out of state, the preponderance of our students are not from out of state. And if you start with an in-state product, you give them a meaningful experience in a beautiful place, yet with a focus on the larger world around us, then they're inclined to stay here. And it is working. It's a successful formula.
I know there are a lot of folks in the legislature who are interested in things like that. So, well, look, we're out of time, but Dr. Thank you so much for coming on Capitol Journal.
Well, it's always a pleasure to see you, but thank you for the invitation to be with you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Joining me next are State Senator April Weaver and Peggy Benson, Executive Officer of the Alabama Board of Nursing. Ladies, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you for having us today.
We're talking about nursing and the profession, some of the issues facing the profession. And Senator, I know that you worked to start this healthcare workforce task force examining some of these issues. How did that come about?
So, as the only nurse currently serving in the Alabama legislature, healthcare is obviously something that's very top of mind for me. I spent about 23 years in the hospital setting, in the private sector, in addition to my legislative service. So it's something that I've been very familiar with and very ingrained in most of my professional life. So I saw this need related to all the workforce issues that we're having related to healthcare. In 2022, we passed a resolution establishing the Alabama Healthcare Workforce Task Force. It's a 3-year project, and we're currently year 2 into that project.
Mm-hmm. Well, it struck me there were these 2 headlines within a couple months of each other. One was how the demand, the profession of nursing was one of the highest in demand jobs out there. Really, tons of demand for nurses. The second headline was up to 39,000 nurses would consider leaving the profession in the next 5 years. the kind of duality there is striking. So let me ask you, what it was a survey that y'all conducted. What did you learn from that survey? What did it tell you about this nursing shortage we might be facing in the next 5 years?
Well, we utilize the National Data Set Workforce Survey that we look at throughout the country at every Board of Nursing and through the National Council. It indicated for our licensees, and we currently have 97,000, that 38,000 plan to leave the profession within the next 5 years. So when we saw that number, we knew that we had to look at some other demographics and say, okay, how many more are going to come in and replace those 38,000 experienced nurses? And that's the concern we have for the most right now, is that we're going to lose most of our experienced nurses. We do have about 25,000 new graduates that will come in during that period, but they don't all typically stay in Alabama. They will get their license here initially, but doesn't mean that they will stay long term in Alabama.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the factors that go into why someone would want to leave the profession? Is it? I mean, I'm guessing some of them are retirements, but I'm after COVID, I'm thinking burnout, things like that. I know pay cannot be, towards the top end. So what are some of the factors that go into that?
Well, when we're looking at it from the standpoint that our average age dropped from 54 to 46 this last survey. So that tells us some people have already left the profession. And we think it was during COVID. Nurses typically don't necessarily retire their license. We have a retired license process that they could utilize if they wanted to. Most of them simply stop working and let their license lapse so they can reinstate anytime they want to. So we're thinking it's either the COVID, the burnout, or many other issues that they've decided it's just they want to take a break from nursing practice. So even though we're at 97,000 right now, we were at 104 prior to the compact. And we know we lost some of those licensees to the compact because they no longer needed an Alabama license. But we do think that we've lost several of our nurses already.
The compact was allowing nurses to basically cross state lines and come in. Yeah. Well, talk to me about, and especially from, y'all's experience in nursing, what happens? What happens when we have a severe nursing shortage, when there just aren't enough nurses to staff a hospital, when it reaches that critical factor? What does that mean for our healthcare system?
Well, obviously it's something that affects the entire community, because healthcare and nursing is something that affects everyone, from the cradle to the grave. Everybody needs health care, and everyone needs good quality health care. So it's something that certainly affects a whole community when there's an issue such as this. We've really been looking at some innovative ways of how we address this. One of the things that we talked about at our last task force was some of these retirees that Peggy mentioned. How do you get them re-engaged? Because, there may be some older nurses who don't want to work 12-hour shifts anymore. There may be some that are tired of the hospital setting, but they have just this vast amount of knowledge, of clinical knowledge. We know that we need clinical educators. Is there a way of bringing them back and including them in a clinical education standpoint so that they're educating our next generation? There's just so many things that we've done here already, and so many other things that we need to look at. I will tell you, there's one specific example I can give you from my district. I represent Bibb, Shelby, and Chilton counties. Bibb and Chilton counties, very rural counties. I have great health care in Bibb County with Bibb Medical Center. But we knew that they were going through a really big issue of needing nurses, and we looked at this and said, how can we look and how can we address the issue that affects the community? There was a public-private partnership there in educating an adult workforce that we did last year in the district. And I can't take credit for it because it all was Shelton State Community College and Bibb Medical Center and the partnership that they created. But the hospital needed the workforce. The community college was there to educate the people, and they created a practical nurse program there in the community where the hospital created the clinical space for teaching. Shelton State helped with the curriculum and the education part of it. The hospital helped cover all their fees and their tuition and everything that was related to that practical nurse program, and they they brought these adult workers back, and they went through a 3-semester program for a practical nurse program. They did their clinicals there in the hospital in the long-term care. So at the end of successfully completing this program, they already were ingrained in certain clinical areas, and they were offered jobs there. So for those who choose to work there, they get, for a 2-year commitment, they get their education paid for, and a commitment from the hospital that they have a job. So certainly it's something we look at changing communities, and I think that's something we can use to replicate.
I was going to ask, that sounds
forward.
like a successful program that maybe could be replicated in other parts of the state.
Certainly.
Is there any talk of that?
Yes, we've looked at, last year the Board of Nursing approved 12 standalone LPN programs so that they could rapidly have some LPNs into the workforce. So those have been initiated. We're beginning to see our first graduates from that. So it's been highly successful. The Board of Nursing has done several other things to assist the nursing workforce, such as creating medication assistant certified. We've currently permitted about 1,200 of those to assist the workforce. And a lot of the hospitals and the nursing homes have picked up those individuals to work for them and help ease some of that burden. We've created the Student Nurse Apprenticeship Program with the Office of Apprenticeship. We currently have 75 employers, 18 colleges, and 350 permits issued. So it's very similar to what the LPN program that they did. And so you see a lot of employers coming to the table saying, we'll pay for your education. Come work for us, and we'll ensure you have a job when you graduate. So we have a lot of our community leaders and the hospitals stepping up and saying we want to partner with post-secondary to do all of this. So we're very excited about these opportunities and how many nurses they're going to bring to the workforce in the next couple of years.
When it comes to addressing some of these workforce issues on the nursing profession, what can the Board of Nursing do in terms of policy versus what the legislature needs to do, or is it kind of working together?
I would say it's absolutely working together, and we do that every year in the legislative session and throughout the time that we're not in session. And it's what we've been doing this summer, of looking at it not only through the task force, but just in conversation of what is it that we can do working together to make the situation better for our state.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, we've been talking about the workforce situation on the broader level, not just in nursing, but from a lot of different professions, and kind of barriers to the workforce. What is stopping folks from, participating in the workforce, from engaging? And what keeps coming up is childcare. It's really expensive, or in some cases not really available. I know that there were some proposals in the legislature last year to maybe incentivize companies to create a childcare service or contract with somebody. I think it was Senator Gudger.
Right.
What do you think about that issue? Do you think that's really something we might be talking about more in this upcoming session?
I would think certainly it would be, and I fully support that. I can tell you, during my time in the hospital, I had a young child, and it was something that was always an issue for us there in the healthcare setting. Lucky for me, we divided and conquered. I had some coworkers that we kind of shared duties and we managed, but for nursing, it's a big issue. Think about nurses. They work 12-hour shifts, some of them. Child is not open 12 hours a day during the times that they need.
Right.
I think that we do need to look at offering some incentives for businesses, especially in the healthcare realm, for offering child care, because I do think it is something that is certainly an issue when it comes to especially a younger workforce.
Yeah, I mean, for some, it's almost a choice whether to,
And it's expensive.
That's what I understand.
Yeah.
I keep hearing that, and in some cases there just aren't enough, and so I keep coming back. Every time we talk about workforce, that issue keeps coming up. Well, look, we're running out of time, but is there anything else about the nursing profession, the workforce issue, that you want to make sure our viewers are aware of?
Well, what we're wanting to do this next year is to look at adding another support position that we will regulate through the Board of Nursing. It's going to the task force for approval, and so that we have an advisory council. The Board of Nursing is working toward that. We want to look at the possibility of getting grant monies to support some of the evaluations that we need for reentry back to practice, as well as looking at some grant monies to offer online counseling to our nurses because of the COVID and the experiences that people went through during that time. So you want to be sure that they can have some potential life-saving mental health counseling as well as substance abuse counseling online. And if we can apply for those grants and utilize that money, so that would be a bill that we would take forward to the legislative session. Senator Weaver has been awesome to work with, and we depend on her heavily to help us to move forward with some of these initiatives. So those are the kind of the major things. And then we want to look at the LPN dual enrollment for high school students. We've just approved a curriculum plan for ACCS to utilize and create those dual enrollment LPN programs for the high school students, which we think would be far beneficial, and see if we cannot get some financial support for those students in the high school so that when they graduate high school, they would be qualified to sit for the NCLEX for LPN. So that would bring a huge number, we think, to the state and help meet a burden in our communities, because you really want the nurses going back to the community to work.
Sounds like almost like creating a pipeline
Yes.
to prevent future shortages.
Yes.
Well, thank y'all for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I look forward to following this issue into the legislative session.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Senator, statesman, and U.S. Vice President William Rufus King of Dallas County served in the U.S. Senate for more than 30 years. In 1852, King was elected vice president on the ticket with Franklin Pierce. While recovering from illness in Cuba, King became the only member of the U.S. executive branch to ever have been sworn into office on foreign soil. He passed away less than a month after being inaugurated.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with more Capitol Journal at the same time, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.